Never done this before. Hello, my name is Rodrigo Bellott. I'm a Bolivian filmmaker. I was lucky enough to be at the TIFF Film Festival in 2020. My film, Tumimang, was the recipient of the Audience Award there. And so it's a tremendous pleasure for me to be hosting this talk with Alejandro Loayza, who is not only a great friend, but a filmmaker that I've seen grow from the very, very starts. I think I've known Alejandro as a teenager, starting film with his brother, also an amazing filmmaker. And I have spent 20 years studying and doing film in New York. So it is a double pleasure to be able to introduce Alejandro in his New York premiere and in New York audiences. So once again, thank you to everybody at TIFF Film Festival, and Jeremy as well, for letting us have this conversation about Bolivian cinema and also Bolivian politics, because it's inevitable with this film. It's a pleasure to be talking about Utama, one of our greatest successes as Bolivian cinema. We're really, really proud of this film. It won Sundance earlier this year, and ever since it won the grand jury prize at Sundance, it hasn't stopped winning awards all over the world. I can't keep track of how many you guys have won already, and I'm not surprised. I've seen the film in cinemas, which is actually one of the things that people should take advantage of. It's a cinematic experience in its greatest sense of the word. Just the music, the performances, the cinematography, the sound, everything is incredibly cinematic, even though it's a really, really intimate, small film. So I hope you guys take the chance to see it in cinemas and also in this festival, which brings just best of social cinema in the world. I can't stress enough the work that TIFF Film Festival does in terms of the curatorship. So welcome, Alejandro. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you, Rodrigo, for the great introduction. I also want to thank the entire team of TIFF Film Festival. It's a pleasure to be part of the festival, and it's a pleasure to be here. So thanks.
No, thank you for sharing your experiences with this. This is a film that is incredibly moving. But I'm going to start with the realism of this film. A lot of people get really puzzled because there's like, is this real people? Is this a documentary? You know, it just so captures the intimacy of this couple and this family in a way that it feels kind of like a fly in the wall. And people are, you know, one of the things that I keep on hearing is, if you want to talk about how he chose these actors, if they are actors, if they are the real people, are they performing characters, or they're using their real names? And ultimately, how real is this community, this story? And we can go further into that as we go on. But talk to us about the process of creating this film, how influenced it is by reality, and how much is fiction, I guess.
Yes, well, the film has this feeling at some points of a documentary, and I think it's because the reality is not well known, not even in Bolivia, and it's a shocking reality. It's people that is about to lose their homeland. They are about to lose the way of, or their way of life because of a climate crisis. But the film is entirely fiction. It has been written and it has been performed by these two wonderful actors that were just performing other characters. They have similarities with the characters, but they are also at the same time very, very different. So it's a big, what they have accomplished is very big, because it was their first time acting, and they were able to perform a character that's different from them. Now, the reality of the place, sadly, it is a little bit, it is that way. This is a place that could be a desert within 10 or 5 years, within 5 or 10 years. And they are suffering these longer periods of droughts, that influence directly on their way of life.
Yeah, I really want to get into that because it's one of the urgent themes of your film, and I think everybody relates to climate change and what's happening to our world. But let's start with what you said. So they are actors. How did you find them? Where was there a casting process? Was there a training process? Because a lot of people get surprised when I tell them that we don't have an acting industry, that we don't have, we have had professional actors in the last 20 years, but for that kind of specificity of those characters, you don't have a big pool of actors that you can choose, and agents and managers. So you kind of have to go out on the streets to do auditions. So if you want to tell us about that process.
Yeah, exactly. We don't have a big industry, so we don't have actors to choose from. And we already knew it was going to be very difficult because we needed elderly people who could speak Quechua perfectly and who could speak Spanish perfectly. And we thought it was better to have people that could relate to the story in a closer way, and that could relate to the characters and to the reality they are living. It was easier to taught them to act rather than teaching actors to do what they do in the daily basis. So we went through this entire area, traveling town by town, asking for all the elderly people and doing acting tests, and just and we found them actually before we started the casting process. We were doing the scouting process. We didn't know where we were going to shoot, so we had many towns in mind, and we saw them. I saw her outside her home, and I asked the driver to stop, and I approached her, and because she has a very powerful glance, very powerful face, and then her husband came out, and he was perfect as well, and they are the couple in real life, so they were perfect, but they were not interested in the film. They just said, no, film, no thanks, we're okay here. So we did the casting process after that, and then we came back to them one more time and one more time, and until we convinced them to do the part. And well, in the acting process, we rehearsed a lot. I worked with a actor coach. We rehearsed around 6 weeks before the shooting.
Wow.
We rehearsed the script scene by scene, every single scene, even the ones that were just a walk or just staring out the window. I really wanted them to internalize the feeling of the character and what's happening in every scene, so they could know what we were doing during shooting, because as you know, you can't shoot in a chronological way. So it's good to have them know, okay, this scene is that scene where you face, etc., etc. So rehearsal was important for me, and it was very important for me that they felt comfortable during shooting, and that they felt comfortable knowing what we were doing at every point.
That's fantastic you telling me this, because I had debates about whether they were not a couple in real life. Mm-hmm. Because and you just said that beautifully. The way she looks at him conveys so much love and so much devotion and so much understanding and compassion, that it's just amazing to see an actor just saying so much with her eyes. It's really, really, really beautiful. Yeah. How are they now? That I know that they've been to a lot of the premieres, and I believe the young actor also won an award in Japan, right, for best acting.
In China. Yeah.
In China. Sorry.
Yes. Well, they are very happy, of course. They have become kind of heroes in their hometown, and they love the film. They love their characters. You know, the shooting process is always, well, not always, but it's a fun process. It's a wonderful experience. So for them, receiving the possibility to have this experience when they are already at their 80s or almost 80s. It was a wonderful thing. And then the premieres, we got the enormous gift to be able to travel with them to Mexico, to Guadalajara. It was their first time on an airplane. It was their first time leaving Bolivia, and also getting to know a city, a huge city. Guadalajara is huge, and the festival is huge. The theaters in the festival are huge, so everything was new for them. And the first time she ever saw a film on in a theater was her own film. This is also
Wow.
impressive, yeah. And then after that, she already saw the film around 4 times, and she always enjoys it. We did the Bolivian premiere at Chubica, which is their hometown, and it was a beautiful event. They invited all communities around, and they also invited all the people that has left the communities that are living abroad, whether in Chile or in a different city inside Bolivia. And it was a big event because there were around 400 people, and we took a big projector and big sound system, so a big screen. It was beautiful for many of the kids also in this region. It was their first time ever watching a film on a big screen, so it was a really beautiful experience.
Wow, what a wonderful experience. Well, I was going to ask you about, I'm assuming you guys shot in their hometown. So where is this? And if you can help us locate that in the map, and a lot of people don't know even where Bolivia is. But so if you can tell us and use this opportunity to talk about why there and why a story about this community as well.
Okay, yes. Well, Bolivia is at the heart of South America. And we shot in the southwest of Bolivia, in Potosí. It's a region, it's south from the Uyuni Salt Desert and north to Atacama Desert in Chile. So it's in between deserts. And the community is called Chubica. The region is called Colchacá. We shot in 4 different communities, five, sorry, not only Santiago de Chubica, but 4 more. And we chose this community because of the climate problem mainly, but also because we traveled. It was a great experience we had with my brother, who's the producer, and my father, who's also part of the producing team. We traveled all around Bolivia doing a documentary series called Planeta Bolivia. So we really know our big country in a good way. And there's no better way than knowing your country than documentary. And we already traveled to this place around 2015. We already knew it. And people there are just so amazingly generous and committed that it just felt right. It just felt right to tell the story there. They have this particular climate issue problem. They have longer and longer periods of droughts. Their glaciers are almost disappeared. So it was important for us to show that in the film.
And since you're talking about the community, and you already mentioned about the problems in the climate, you've seen that as you were documenting those places with your father. And was that where the inspiration of the film came up, to tell a story about being forced to leave your homeland due to climate change?
I think yes. I think because when you travel and you see different realities in your own country, it was something that impressed me, and that we already have climate victims in Bolivia, and we don't even realize that in the cities. And I think part of the inspiration came from all these travels. Bolivia is a huge, diverse, beautiful country, as you well know, and we have plenty of stories to tell and plenty of different cultures to show. And so it is definitely part of the inspiration, and it's also part of the dream I have to portray different parts of Bolivia, to show all the diversity, all the cultures we have. It would be wonderful to be able to do it.
Yeah, I remember when I started studying cinema, this idea that it's a time in a time travel machine that allows you to go to places where physically you probably would never be able to meet in your life or know in your life. And you wonderfully transport us to a place that is kind of unknown, even to most Bolivians, because it's so remote. And you know, as we know, the roads are not accessible. It is a hard travel to go to those places, and that's why they're politically also mostly abandoned. And you speak up a little bit about that, if you want to talk about the situation and why is it, because they hint at the fact that it's the possibility of going to the city. It's not a real possibility. And why, and a lot of people ask me, why don't they have access to healthcare and other better conditions? And since we're talking already about that, what can you talk a little bit more about the situation of these communities, because there are many, you know?
Yes, well, as I said, Bolivia is very big. It's 10 times the size of New York, for just to relate with the size. And we are a very small country in economics. We are a very poor country. So for every single government, it was always difficult to reach all these communities that are very, very far away from the centers, the main centers of the country. And therefore these places have been always abandoned, and this happens all over Bolivia, in the Amazon forest as well, very abandoned communities in the south as well, in the Chaco. So this is a place that has been historically forgotten, abandoned, and as you said, they don't have basic cares like health or even water supply. They have energy since 2020 or something like that. Sorry, 2000 around that time. So it is impressive to know that in your own country there's still people with no basic cares. And I think that, but this also, I mean, it comes with it sounds very bad, but at the same time it has advantages, because they don't feel poor themselves. It's not that they have a very it's a different way of life, and they have a different perspective on progress and on wealth. And so they have a more pure it's difficult not to romanticize these abandoned places, these forgotten places. But when you're there and you feel the peace they have, you're almost jealous of that. You know, you yourself are living now in a small town in Bolivia, not that abandoned. It's not abandoned, but it's different. You can feel the peace you have there. And I think this is a wrong perception we have about life and about progress. And we become oppressed in big cities. We are under the tyranny of the clock, of the time, and we are always in a hurry, always stressed. And I think also the film, I wanted to show that there is also a different way of life, and that is more peaceful, that also has dignity. And I myself am very comfortable and happy when I visit these places. I don't know if I could ever live there, but it's really comfortable to be there from time to
It's
time.
beautiful that you talk about the tyranny of time, because also what your film does is forces you to experience for an hour and a half emotionally time in a different way. You know, we're so used to the fast-paced cut films with like lots of information visually, and even though dialogue is so you know, accurate and scarce, but really, you know, when it's needed, and you're forced to be present. I love that about your film. It forces you to be present in the film and pay attention to nuances, as we were talking about the looks of the characters, the way they just look at each other, and you give us the time to enjoy that. And it's really beautiful to go. It reminded me a lot of Osu. You know, in Japanese cinema of the 70s and 60s, where everything was just like, you had to take your time, and I think it's a joy nowadays to be able to disconnect from the crazy. I'm dying to see how people experience this in New York. Just forced to disconnect and live in Utama time. Um, if you want to talk a little bit about your influences in the kinds of cinema that you like to do, you know, because it is a style. It is you come with a really strong proposal of how to observe cinema and experience cinema.
Yeah, well, I think that comes mainly because of what the film asked for. And as you well said, it is a different pace, it is a different rhythm. And I knew that I wanted to portray that and to transport the viewers to this particular place and rhythm. So the way I shot the film was thinking of the better way to transport people into this particular rhythm and pace and peace as well. And I like classic cinema very much. I like cinema that narrative cinema, but very narrative, like very focused on the story and on the characters, and that every tool you have in cinema helps you to the story and not just to show off how talented you are making a film, but just helping the story and the narrative. So I like films with music. For instance, I like Billy Wilder very much. I like the Nordics. I like them very much, like Roy Anderson and Aki Kaurismäki. And of course, the masters of cinema, of course, I like Scorsese and I like, yes, but, and also Noah Baumbach, I like him very much. And from the South, Lucrecia Martel, she has a very particular way of also portraying a different rhythm of the stories. And for this particular film, I have like watched and rewatched a couple of films such as Drifting Clouds from Kaurismäki and Ida from Paweł Pawlikowski, and also Paris, Texas from Wim Wenders.
Wow.
So, yeah, a couple of films that I have studied for
Thank
this.
you for thank you for sharing that. I want to talk a little bit about, now that we're talking about cinema and classic cinema and tradition. Well, it doesn't surprise me for people who don't know, this is your first film, your first film as a director and as your first feature film, but you have a long experience as a photographer. And you can see that in your cinema, the way you're used to communicating information narratively. You tell stories with one frame, you know, and that kind of economy, narrative economy, is only experience. It only comes from experience, I think. So if you want to talk about your experience as a photographer and how you ventured into cinema, you know.
Yeah, well, you said it very, very well. You defined it very, very well, because I was a still photographer and I was used to telling stories with just one frame. And I think that gives me like a lot of freedom when I'm able to tell stories with 24 frames per second and like minutes. But I have a lot of that. I feel some of the looks, the eyes, the glances they have, the characters have, come from this experience as a photographer. I was very used to direct people for photography, and I also participated in many films as a still photographer and then as a cinematographer, as a DP, and that helped me to have experience with the shooting process, to watch especially to watch directors work. As a cinematographer, you're just besides the director, and you can learn from her or him very much. You can watch them, and I worked with many different directors, and I realized that I wanted more decisions. I wanted to have all the decisions on set, and that's why and I ventured to directing. And it was a very natural process. It was nice because I started my first feature, I directed my first feature with no pressure at all. No one was expecting anything from me. I was a cinematographer and I was a good photographer that was perfectly fine. So I had no pressure as a director. And I think that also helped me to work like with no.
What a privilege. I wish everybody would have that.
Yeah.
Now, uh, we have a little more time, so I want to talk about the traditional the history of Bolivian cinema, because you're kind of coming full circle with a new voice.
Yeah.
You are right now our predilect son of Bolivian cinema, but there's a lot of people comparing the film with San Ginés. San Ginés is our greatest filmmaker from the 70s and 60s, political and social activism through cinema, and especially gave a voice and a visibility to indigenous communities in Bolivia. And somehow 40 years later, you are doing this not from a social point of view or um you know uh like the fight, but also through something that I find really refreshing is you're telling a love story
Yeah.
and talking about social issues in the meantime. So if you want to talk a little bit about San Ginés, and also for people who don't know, your father is one of our most accomplished filmmakers, the filmmaker that actually inspired me to be a filmmaker. And I always say that. So eh, tell us a little bit about your role as a filmmaker. If there's something that came up now, now that you're getting all this success, or were you thinking about this when you created the film, when you're um, writing the film, the
Yeah.
social issues that kind of people expect on Bolivian cinema from its history?
Yeah, well, I was not thinking about it. I tried not to think ahead. I think it's healthier. And I think that as well as a Bolivian director, I tried to watch all the Bolivian films I could. I have watched all of your films, of course, except Perfidia. You must send me a screener. And of course, you have to understand the cinema that's made in your country in order to do your own, to have your own voice, in order to uh, I mean, you come from a place, you come from a background. For me, it was very important. Recently there was a program in Czech Republic when they premiered Utama. They showed, before Utama, they showed Vuelve Sebastiana from Jorge
Oh,
Ruiz. And it's amazing how to see this. Jorge Ruiz is one of our main filmmakers in our history, and it was incredible to see both films together, and that they both speak about the same problems. Even this one is from the 50s, so 70 years later. It was beautiful. And then Jorge Sanginés is another big filmmaker from Bolivia, and I think our generation is very lucky because we have had very different kinds of cinema, and now we have more freedom. Because I think in the 70s, you were, if you were not doing political cinema, you were just wasting your time and money and someone else's money. uh, and then I think starting maybe with around your debut film, I think in that time we started to have more and more freedom to just tell stories, and with no pressure of being political and social. And I think that gives me now the moment, and us as a generation, to just talk about stories that can have social and political backgrounds, but are not they not, don't need to be a political film.
and yet your film is incredibly political, and I wanted to talk about more less about the story in itself, but about the universality. And it's interesting that you mentioned Vuelve Sebastiana, which is a film in the 50s about a little girl that has to leave her community
Yes.
to find resources to save her community. And in your case, it's an older couple, and one of them decides not to leave his community in order to preserve the dignity in a sense. So I think one of the things that a lot of people are resonating with is having to leave, the immigration aspect, or the exile, the self-exile due to political conditions, or in your case, climate conditions.
Yeah.
And especially, right now, there's a lot of talk about what's going on in Europe, and World War II. It resonates incredibly with this film in terms of exile. So you want to talk a little bit about that in your film, and how people are receiving this, in communities and countries that are historically marked by this kind of migration.
Yeah, well, I think migration is a problem. It comes, there must be no harder thing than having to leave your home because of economical reasons or political or whatever reason. When you leave your home against your will, it must be very painful. And I think that the Utama can resonate all around the world because in one point or another we have all been we all come from migrants. I mean, and migration is a both sense treat. And now it's true that now many people from the south are migrating to the north, but at one point it was different. The people that were escaping from the war were leaving to South America. So I think that's why the reason why it can resonate all around the world. And I think that climate migrants is now a problem that we have to start thinking about as a global problem, and we have to prepare ourselves to receive these climate migrants, because it's going to happen and it's going to be unpredictable.
Yes, and that's a long, long, long debate that I would love to continue having. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, and I can't thank you enough for your generosity and all the things that you've made us talk about. And I hope that there is a bigger debate once people get to see the film. I want to end up with a famous song from Tina Turner, "What's Love Got to Do with It?" Because this is one of the wonderful things about it. I come from a generation that kind of just don't believe in the romantic comedy, but your film is a film that made me again believe in love. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about the film, besides all the political and social awareness you brings to light. And you want to tell us a little bit about why make now, among so much fear and so much miscommunication, you decide to make a film about love.
Oh, I don't know. That's the most difficult question I have had. I don't know. I think, well, as you said, I mean, love moves everything. Love is the most powerful thing we have in the world. And I really wanted to show a pure love story between two persons that only needed each other, and whose biggest richness was to have each other and be in a remote place and having to say goodbye. So that was the main inspiration, to show a pure love story. And I thought that a couple of elderly was the perfect characters to portray that love story.
Love despite the lack of time as well.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ale.
Thank you.
Once again, thank you to TINEC International Film Festival and for facilitating this talk between two Bolivian filmmakers, New York Bolivian filmmaker from Bolivia and a Bolivian filmmaker from New York. You're in my town, where I call it home, for 25 years. I wish I could be there with you. So it's a pleasure to be through Zoom. And I wish you the best of luck in this New York premiere and whatever comes next for this wonderful film and your career, my friend. It's a true honor.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Such a pleasure to share this moment with you.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.